Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is looking at the astrological chart of Bobby Kennedy Jr. He has been in the news recently, and I thought it would be interesting to explore his chart. I especially wanted to know why he seems so scorpionic to me. His father, Robert F. Kennedy Sr., as many people know, was assassinated in June of 1968, just 2 months after Martin Luther King was assassinated. And so it was a very difficult summer, I am sure. I was in diapers during that time, so I'm not saying this like I was there. But anyway, before I continue, I'm kind of doing this in a different way. I'm actually filming it, and I got my magic wand to kind of point out things, but I don't think it's going to be really necessary. I don't know if this type of recording is really the best, but we will see, won't we? So the things that I want to explore here are, first of all, is there anything that can show a person comes from a political family or a prominent family? Secondly, Bobby has had well-publicized issues with substance abuse. Can we see it in the chart? And just like his father's passing and his wealth, what else? I mean, coming from a wealthy family, in other words. And his interests. He's very interested in the environment. He is a Capricorn. And so that makes a lot of sense because Capricorn is an earth sign and he has a lot of it in his personal points. So I'll get to that. But there's just something about his eyes or his face that seemed very intense. And when I looked, I couldn't find anything specifically, although he does have Mars in Scorpio, so he is scorpionic in that sense. Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I just saw something that is kind of concerning. Okay. All right. So I don't know much about him in terms of his biography and all the things that he's done. I know that he was an environmental lawyer and he was very successful at that. And he did some things that I think he cleaned up the Hudson River, which was probably heavily polluted in New York. And so he really accomplished things that he set out to do. But I don't know his whole life story. And sometimes people will not necessarily divulge them. They may appear to be an open book, but they might keep a lot of things hidden out of, respect for other people that are connected to the story, or just simply because they are private people and they don't want to do it. So we have to always realize that even if someone writes an autobiography, they may not tell you everything that happens. And I have done some celebrity charts where it's like they had some stuff that I'm like, what could this be? But we never, they may never tell you if they had some kind of like secret traumatic event that they really don't want to talk about. Okay. So I want to start with his, inner planets here. His sun is in Capricorn. Interestingly, he's born on January 17th, 1954. 1954 isn't that interesting, although he's 70 years old, and I think he looks really good for somebody who's 70. But he is born on Benjamin Franklin's birthday, if I'm not mistaken. And Benjamin Franklin was really one of those people that, remember reading a biography of him that was for children when I was a child. And, he was so, I was going to say versatile, or he was so like into different things. He was so good at different things. And so it doesn't surprise me that Bobby is very well versed in different areas. And that really impresses me because he's an incredibly intelligent person, but he's so eloquent, just like his father was, just like JFK was. As a matter of fact, if you want to get chills, on YouTube, if I think to link it, I will. I usually forget these things. But his father, RFK, on the night that MLK was assassinated, RFK happened to be doing some kind of an event, and he found out about the murder right before he went in front of some people. And I think I don't know if he was on a stage or on the back of a pickup truck. It was very impromptu. But he told the audience that Martin Luther King had been killed, had been slain. And you can hear the shock from the audience. And then he went on to say some words that it just like was so moving and so elegant and eloquent. And Bobby has that same quality. And there's like almost like this poetic, that's when I say elegant. There's almost like this poetic quality that RFK had. And Bobby may have inherited that because he has Mercury in conjunction with Venus. He also has a sun in conjunction with Venus, which will give him an elegant demeanor. Now, when I say demeanor, you usually think of the rising sign, but you can definitely see the sun sign influencing the person. I believe, especially as they get older, that they are showing more of the sun sign. So that's why another thing that I want to say is that I believe that he's a super sensitive person, and he has actually revealed that in a lot of ways. Because I was just to kind of prep myself a little bit, I read a couple of interviews with him, from about 10 years ago. And he was talking about his relationship with his mother. I was actually looking to see, because he has Neptune in the 4th house, if he had, if his parents had substance abuse issues. And I couldn't find anything related to that with his mother. And he mentioned in this interview that his father was a teetotaler. So it sounds to me like I don't really know, what Neptune the 4th meant to him. I'll get to that in a bit. I just wanted to say that he said in one of the interviews that he didn't always feel that his mother's love was unconditional. And as we know, that is not, unusual in any household, whether it's from a wealthy, successful one or one that is, less so. It just is part of human nature that this can happen. But, somebody who's a Capricorn, this can, and he doesn't have the moon in Capricorn, and the moon in Capricorn can really be the bugaboo because the moon can be the mother and it can be very exacting. But his moon in Cancer is going to be super sensitive. The moon rules Cancer in astrology. And basically what this can mean is that the person with the sun in Capricorn, and they're not close enough in degrees to officially oppose one another, but they are quite opposite, even though they're called complementary signs. Capricorn is hard-boiled. Even at this late degree of Capricorn, it is, approaching the cusp of Aquarius, but Aquarius is ruled by Uranus and Saturn, like Capricorn is. That neither one of those planets are sensitive planets. So, although Uranus can be very intuitive in its own way, but there's like a hard, craggy demeanor that he has. And I know somebody else who's a late degree Capricorn who has this as well. And also has water placements for the inner planets. These types of people, when the sun is in Capricorn, the person may really fight hard to avoid emotion, or they may have such a strong, the Saturnian part of themselves may be so strong that it does take over the more sensitive side. Because Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, is like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, pull up your big girl panties, and learn to deal. Those kinds of, that kind of mentality. But Cancer is super sensitive, and the person, I feel like he not only has the moon in Cancer, but it's in the 12th house. I feel like this can be the source of addiction, because the 12th house is the house of addiction. And it is this, because it's the moon sign, the person with the moon in the 12th house can feel unloved, can feel like they were not treated with understand, like people didn't understand their emotions. His mother, remember that he lost his father when he was how old? He was born in 54. It was in the summer of 68. He must have been 13. I thought he was younger than that, but 13 is still very young. So you can imagine the trauma that he experienced. And that can also lead to drug or, alcohol issues. And having the moon in the 12th house makes somebody very sensitive, but his mother's still alive. She is an Aries. And therefore, and she went through a lot of trauma. She's not a Kennedy. Of course, his father is the one who is a Kennedy. They have had their fair share of tragedy. His mother's side has had some high publicized tragic events and scandals. And this is something that I would consider ancestral karma, perhaps, something along those lines. So, and he also comes from a very large family. I believe, I don't know if it's like 11 kids, but I mean like, those big Irish families. So when you come from a big family, it can be hard to get your individual needs met because there's just so many kids. And of course, after his dad's passing, then there weren't two parents anymore. So anybody who, I actually saw a documentary about I think her name was Peggy Guggenheim, but she started the Guggenheim Museum, I believe. But she had so much tragedy. It was a really fascinating documentary. Just because you're wealthy doesn't mean that everything is hunky-dory. So it's really, I think it's not spiritually wise to kind of dismiss people who are wealthy as not having any problems. I don't think that's true. And anyway, I'm not going to lecture anybody. I just wanted to say that. So he has Leo rising, 2 degrees, so very close to Cancer again. But yeah, Leo rising. And it's so interesting because he comes out, Donald Trump has Leo rising, and Mars and Leo. And Leo, of course, is the showman. It's the actor, the entertainer, the creative force of nature, the larger than life personality. And when Bobby joined Trump on stage, and as I am recording this, it just happened yesterday, the applause that he received was thunderous. And he seemed to be like eating it up. That's Leo rising for you, or Leo in general, is this love of flattery and all of that. But right before that, as Trump was talking, he was very stoic. That's the Capricorn side. So you can see both sides of that. But both Capricorn and Leo are very ambitious signs, and they are both signs of the leader. Capricorn through Saturn, the ruler of the 10th house, and the top of the chart, and the father or the authority figure. Leo, the fire sign that is known for hard work, ambition. That sounds like a Capricorn, to tell you the truth, but Leos can be very ambitious and also have charisma. And this combination can be quite compelling for them. But yeah, very sensitive moon. His Mercury is at 29 degrees of Capricorn, which makes it on the cusp with Aquarius. I have heard Bobby talk about what other people deem conspiracy theories. And that was another thing that I was trying to figure out, like, okay, where is this coming from? And he has that nice conjunction between Mercury and Venus. However, he has hard angles between Mercury and Saturn. Between Mercury, he's got a square between Mercury and Saturn. He's got an opposition between Mercury and Uranus, and a square between Mercury and Neptune. This is really important, I feel, because he has Neptune in the 4th house of home and family. He has Mercury in the 6th, that's health and work related. And I wonder if he, with that square and with having Neptune in the 4th house, if he possibly, because he seems like a very, straightforward person, but I wonder if there isn't at least some issues that he's glossing over, over idealizing. I haven't seen that yet in any interviews, but it's possible, or just has a distorted view on it. Also, it's important to note, he has what we would call, I guess you could call it a speech impediment. I can't remember what caused this. I think his mother has this as well, but he didn't always have this. So it's important to note that. He is clean and sober, so it's not from using, currently or anything like that. And the opposition between Mercury and Uranus, I feel, is about rebellious speech. He has taken on big pharma, what we would call the deep state. He really exposed the DNC, because because he felt that he had to leave that party, and what they did to him, suing him and infiltrating his his whatever you call it, his campaign workers and all of that. And so it's really like, and he always, whenever he talks, he just seems so like on point, that it's interesting that he has that square between Mercury and Neptune, because that can indicate distortion in perceiving information or disseminating it. The person may, he has a square, having that square between, I think, but you know what I think too, with the opposition, I think it's because, a lot of it's because he was born into a prominent political family. When you're born into that kind of situation, you're expected to toe the line. And if you are someone who is a truth seeker, that can be extremely upsetting, because you feel like you're forced to swallow all your communication, that you're not allowed to speak out on things. And if you're somebody who is like, they make a big point on saying that his family of origin, that there are a lot, that his family is against him, as somehow proof that he's in the wrong. And I remember hearing somewhere that the scapegoat is the one who sees through all the bullshit in the family of origin, the dysfunctional family. So having your family all against you doesn't mean that you're in the wrong at all. The late John Bradshaw, who was a psychologist, said that the family is a cult. It was funny too, because he was a Cancer sun sign, and they're associated with the family. So I agree with him. And somebody like this who has a family so large, that's a big ass cult. So if you go against the grain and people cancel you, who knows? Maybe it's for the best. But he has a lot of Capricorn, so it might be quite painful for him to have this family disharmony, because Capricorn and Cancers tend to be very family oriented. Oh, it's funny, I'm not surprised that his North Node is actually in Capricorn too, because it's in the 6th house. So he just said, make America healthy again. So he does have this, that's one of his pet interests, is health. And so his Mars is in Scorpio, which again, this is like the detective who will not stop until they get to the bottom of something. It's very fierce. Scorpio is ruled by Mars as well as Pluto. So, that increases that warrior-like energy. And let's see his Mars. Interestingly, with his Mars, he has a conjunction with Saturn, which is, makes me wonder about, RFK as a family man. Was he, he has a square between Mars and Pluto, which can indicate violence, some sort of abuse. So, and his Mars is in the 4th house. To me, that can be domestic abuse. It doesn't have to be from the father. The 4th house to me is the mother, but again, not sure. Don't want to besmirch anybody's reputation, but he has 2 tough placements in the well, actually they're all tough, because Neptune can indicate skeletons in the closet. And this can be secrets, but I think it can really be about lies. Like the person is told something about a family member that isn't quite true. And it can indicate addiction in the family of origin or some other secret that is there. But there can be a lot of confusion, like what is true, what is false. And that's why he has that square between Mercury and Neptune. He may even second guess himself. Am I perceiving reality? Because sometimes in dysfunctional families, they'll say, you didn't see that, you didn't hear that. And, you know, we all know about Hollyweird or Hollywood, but political families, they might as well be Hollywood too, because they got a lot of weird shit going around in that arena too. So he has Neptune here, he has Saturn here. This can be that authoritarian home where that's run like a military base. Again, it could be the mother, if his mom is in Aries, she may have, if you have all those kids, you gotta keep everything in line. But I think she had household help. And Mars is in this area. So what does that mean? I mean, that could mean domestic violence. It could mean conflict of some sort. Maybe it means that the mom is an Aries. And certainly Aries people are very forceful. She seems like an interesting woman. So it's not to suggest that she's, a bad person at all. It's just that sometimes the way that a parent parents is not what a particular child needs. If he had been a Sagittarian, it probably would have been all, with a moon in Leo, it probably would have been all good. But because his moon is in Cancer, he may have felt that he wasn't given enough tender treatment in some way. Going back to the second house, Pluto here, that's very interesting because this is a house of money. And it can be earned income, but I feel like we can look at it in general. The 8th house is supposed to be other people's money, so it could be like our family's money, but I think you can even look at the second house. And the Kennedy family actually were what do they call them? Bootleggers. I had to go and actually look up the word because I was like, is that the word? Do you ever have to go and look up a word that you've always known just because maybe you haven't used it in a long time? I know that happens to me sometimes, and I'm like, of course that's the word, and I apologize if I got this wrong. I think I don't know if it was his grandfather or great grandfather. Yeah, this was during Prohibition in the 20s, when alcohol was illegal in the United States. And I think that's how they built their fortune, if I'm not mistaken. So Pluto is the lord of the underworld. So you can see when somebody has Pluto in the second house, that money could be made with, kind of like sketchily. Or maybe they come from money that began sketchily. Of course, if you look at it from another angle, big pharma can sell drugs legally. And, when the powers that be decide that alcohol is legal or other drugs are legal, then all of a sudden it's all good. And nobody goes to jail. Nobody, is branded a criminal. So it's all relative at the end of the day. But yeah, so there's that kind of, I think also that can be an obsession with wealth. I don't know him to be, I mean, he is, I think his net worth is pretty up there. Millions and millions of dollars, maybe $50 million. I mean, that is massive. And I'm assuming that comes from his inheritance because he hasn't been doing things that are particularly, I don't think, when he was an environmental lawyer, that he was making like money hand over fist. And then he also was on Air America on a radio show, and I'm sure they paid him peanuts for that one. So I don't know. I think that it's probably mostly inherited money. And by the way, I think that Pluto in the second house might be inherited money because Pluto rules the eighth house, the opposite house, along with Mars. And that is other people's money. So it might be that other people's money becomes your money or his money. And it can confer wealth. So certainly that was the case. But like I said, I just want to reiterate that his Mars square Pluto, I feel like that's some sort of brutality. And Mars is in the fourth house, so I feel like that can be sometimes also a cause for turning to substance abuse. But I will say that all you need is your father being murdered for a person to kind of have psychological difficulties that are hard to cope with. Doesn't take much more than that. And he was named, I'm assuming he was the oldest son because he was named after his father, but I'm not sure about that. So you can imagine the extra, I don't know if you call it burden or what, being the namesake of that person might have been for him. I will say, looking at his son, he has some hard angles to Neptune, which is oftentimes, I think, a good indicator of substance abuse. In the first case, he has the sun square Neptune. That the sun is your identity. So when somebody has a sun square Neptune or opposing Neptune, they can feel like they don't know who they are. Now, of course, if you're the child of a celebrity or famous person, this can actually be very difficult. People say, oh, wow, they have so many problems. I'm sure it's just so horrible to be born into wealth and everything. But there's other problems that maybe the average person doesn't experience, but still is hard for them. And since he was the namesake and his father passed away, that might have been quite confusing, like, am I supposed to follow in his footsteps just out of a sense of, respect to him, his legacy, his memory? So though that can cause somebody also to feel compelled to use because they, for a Capricorn, lacking identity can be particularly difficult. And by the way, most of his planets are in the lower half of the chart. So the first 6 houses are considered personal. So he might be a very private person. And when he has to go into the limelight, it might not be that easy for him. That's why I think that he will become a good president. I think he could be a good leader, but I think he probably still needs a little bit of seasoning in some way, because I think that his tendency is to be more insular. So he also has a square between Mercury and Neptune. I've already covered that. But he has one from Venus square Neptune. And that can lead to overly idealizing a love situation, having distorted understanding of the relationship that the person's having with another individual, and sometimes falling in love with the wrong person. But I just want people to remember that it doesn't mean that you can't ever um, have a healthy relationship or a realistic relationship. It simply means that that is one of the challenges that the person faces. He has a trine between Jupiter and Neptune, so both of these planets are associated with spirituality. Jupiter is the ancient ruler of Pisces, so it definitely has an affinity for that. And so he talks about God. And I guess he went to AA and found his higher power and all of that stuff. So that's probably figuring into it. By the way, with his moon in the 12th house, he also has Uranus here, and that can be the person that is a closet freak, a person who is very like an Aquarian type of individual, but they might be afraid to reveal that. And I think, especially since he's a Capricorn and has the moon in Cancer, Capricorn and Cancer are traditional signs. So, being what we would call bohemian, um, alternative is not really totally is a Aquarian thing, but not a Capricorn or Cancer thing. So there might be some conflict with that. So in his 6th house, he has a stellium. He has all these planets there. Well, he has 3 planets, Chiron, which is an asteroid in the North Node, all in Capricorn. 1, 2, 3. I want to make sure. North Node and yeah, North Node and Chiron. Very interesting, because the father wound, yeah, that's the Capricorn, the father wound, and yet in the 6th house, it can be the work that a person's doing. When the North Node is in the 6th house, the person's work is their dharma or their path. As a matter of fact, he said something to that effect, that he feels that his work, this is where, his path or his work. And I got the feeling that he was also speaking from a spiritual perspective. So he has the sun in the 6th house. That means that a person really loves to be productive. This is the house of Virgo in astrology, so it takes on that Virgo-esque type of vibe, which is very organized, very precise, pays attention to details, disciplined, down to earth, realistic, productive. And that, I follow him on social media, and one time he posted this picture of this snake that he found on his property, and he was showing it. And, I just was so delighted by that, because he really, he really embraces the natural world. And that's something that means that he respects the natural world. Mercury being here, the person may speak for a living. Of course, he did have a radio show, and anybody who's a politician, they do speeches. Well, I'm just going to leave that right there. Venus here the person can really, I feel like a person like this takes pleasure in work. Venus can be about pleasure, and Venus can also be, the sixth house can be co-workers, and Venus can mean that co-workers become the person's friends. So they're not like, so they mix business and pleasure with pleasure. But with the sun here, the person just likes to be useful. And so anything that they can do, they'll be found doing. Running errands and whatnot, or if they have to, clean the driveway or something, that's the kind of thing that the person can always find ways to be productive. And identifies, the sun can be the ego, but I'm talking about the healthy ego, the sense of self. By can They can identify themselves by their work. And interestingly, the moon is in the 12th house, which is that house of self-undoing escapism. So the person is best when they are being productive. Anytime that they go into their emotions and are too stuck on that, they could risk falling back into self-pity, which is definitely possible when you have the moon in the 12th house, and never really feeling emotionally satisfied. So that's something definitely anyone who is listening who has the moon in the 12th house, it doesn't even matter what sign it's in, but in Bobby's case, it's in a water sign, so it makes it even more sensitive. And he actually has an opposition between the moon and Chiron. So there can be even projection on the person that they're with. And we see this with moon in Cancer, or I see this. I feel this with moon in Cancer in general, that, or you can even say the sign of Cancer in general, that there is a tendency to kind of go, be the martyr, like, why can't you call me? You don't call me enough. Why can't you tell me that you love me? All of these, it's like demands almost. And the person with the moon in Cancer or the moon in the 12th house has to understand that people love in different ways. And if somebody does not seem to care, at least as much as you care, it is what it is. I mean, that's literally the case, is that you have to accept the reality of it. If it bothers you that, I'm saying this for anybody who has the moon in Cancer or Pisces or in the 12th house, if it bothers you that this is happening, ask yourself why you think you need validation from another person to feel that you are good enough, that you are lovable. I guarantee you that once you fully understand and have mastered that situation, that you'll have it in spades. I really believe that. I think that's the paradox of life, is when we don't need something anymore, that's when it comes to us. And so I think, okay, so then he also has Jupiter in the 11th house. Well, let me just say his midheaven is in Aries, and that can mean the person who is very brave. It's like the warrior. I don't know if he ever considered military service. Probably not, because I think he's more of a pacifist and doesn't want forever wars. But going back to that 6th house with the North Node in Capricorn, it really is about becoming his own man. Not living in the shadow of his father. Very difficult when you have the same name as the guy. But carving your own territory, or creating your own, identity, if you will. And this is through his work, probably. Chiron in the sixth house can even be the healer. So there can be pain through work itself, maybe not knowing what the person wants to do. So maybe he was a late bloomer in a certain way where he didn't really feel he was on the right track. And then he finally, when he aligned with everything, then it just kind of came, it gelled, and he was able to just embrace a new life. Jupiter in the 11th house can be the 11th house is the house of the collective. So this is, I do believe this is the house of politics because it's a humanitarian house. And Jupiter here, when he's lucky when he is reaching out to the masses. And since this is also the house of hopes and wishes, I believe that this gives people a sense of hope that life can become better. Jupiter is about expansion, but just luck, creating, positive situations maybe for people's lives. But he might have great popularity because Jupiter is the house of friendships and groups. He may have a lot of connections too with social, like groups, or just other people. I don't know if we consider that part of fame, if you will. I really don't see anything. I think he is kind of a private person, so it doesn't quite jump out at me. But of course, just by virtue of being born the child of a prominent person, that's going to do it. Also with Chiron and Capricorn, I think, like, yeah, the father wound, but also the authority figure wound of, like, who are these authority figures? They're trying to shut me up. And oops, I guess I lost my my tablet is out of juice, so I'm just doing an audio for the last few minutes. And yeah, I think Jupiter in the 11th house can mean that he can be helped by his connections or friendships. Also, I did read at one time that the 11th house was the house of the internet. Now I'm reading the third house, but luck through the internet. And certainly he has had Uranus transiting his 10th house of career. So I feel that he boosted his career through the use of social media for sure. So it's a very interesting, I could go on and on, I've gone on long enough, but I just wanted to explore this a little bit, and you will see what happens to him down the road or with him. I have a feeling that he's going to play a big role in this. I really think he's going to play a big role in 5D, because what he talks about is exactly the more idyllic version of life than what we have been sold, is what we have to just accept life can be. But, that's the Piscean age in the third dimension, which is all about martyrdom, about the suffering of mankind. And it's kind of, to me, it's connected with the Christ complex, that somehow suffering leads to something good, and people just assume that life is about suffering. And I think a lot of dogma from religions teaches that as well. But now, personally, I think that because we are ascending, we're becoming higher in vibration, that we no longer accept that version of life, that we want something more. And the things that Bobby talks about are the things that make life better for everyone. And I think that ultimately he will be part of that new earth that we are all eagerly awaiting, but that we have to create ourselves. Can't wait for somebody else to create it. It's not how it works anymore. Trusting in authority figures and being like children to the authority figures and not, conscious co-creators of our reality. Alrighty then, I hope that you enjoyed this. And if you'd like a private reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.